Hello, quilty friends. Welcome to my studio, Stitched by Susan. I'm Susan Smith, and this is a brand new episode of Live and Unscripted. In these episodes, I will typically work on a project from start to finish, from loading through quilting, right through completion, and just talk to you as I go about decisions that I'm making, choices, challenges, those sorts of things that are within the quilt. So hopefully these sessions are just a way that you can kind of come into my studio, look over my shoulder a little bit, and just see things happen in real time. They are unedited, so thread breaks show up. I even once knocked a tripod and a camera over. So it is live. It is fully live. And my black cat, who's the studio supervisor or quilt police, is right here beside me on the floor, and he'll probably be here the whole session. So if you hear any purring going on, that's him. Anyway, a couple things before we get started. Today's session is going to be a very small quilting project, and the focus will be much more on splicing or patching in batting. So if you've ever wondered how to do that, or maybe you'd like a faster way than the one you're used to, stick around for that. I think you'll like it. It's not a way that I've seen commonly of people handling their batting, so it might be new to you, but I think it's a really efficient way of doing it. So let's see what else. Yeah, by all means, like and subscribe if you enjoy these episodes. If you enjoy today's episodes, spread the word. And I got actually a phone call this week asking me to do a presentation for a machine quilting guild. And so I'll put that out there too. If your guild or small group, it doesn't have to be a formal guild, group of half a dozen women or quilters would like some type of presentation, feel free to reach out to me and we'll see if we can make that happen. And it can be geared then toward the topics that you're interested in. So just email me, info@stitchedbysusan.com. Also, as you're watching, if there are topics that come to you that you'd like to hear about, email me as well. And I try to keep a running list of those kind of questions. And then when quilts come through my studio that I think would be a good demonstration of that topic, they get put in the queue for these live and unscripted episodes. As you might imagine, quilting is my business, so only a few of the quilts I do hit the episodes, but I'll try and bring to you the ones that particularly feature the topics you're interested in. So let me know. What else? Got my coffee in hand. I hope you've got a hot beverage too. Where I am in the inland northwest, it is wet snow falling today, so it's a chilly fall day. So my creamy coffee is very, very good. And if you would be interested in supporting this channel, you can easily do that by going to buymeacoffee.com/stitchedbysusan. And it doesn't actually buy my coffee, but it's kind of a fun way to say it because coffee's my beverage of choice. But it's just a way to support this show, and in fact has purchased our camera that I'll be doing my close-up work on. That was purchased courtesy of all of you supporting the show. So thank you to each and every one of you that did that. And also a recent addition since our last episode was that Dave got a new desk. So I should post some before and after pictures because in all the episodes up till this point, he has actually physically brought all his equipment from his office, a couple doors down the hall, to my studio. So computers, monitors, hubs, wires, he carries all this stuff into my studio, connects everything, and sets it all up. Well, we went and got him a desk that's on wheels, and it's slim enough that he can literally unplug it from the outlet, roll down the hallway and into my studio, plug the things back in, and I mean, that's not everything, because like this morning, as he could tell you, and maybe will, he's had just a heck of a time with the cameras. But anyway, it makes it so much easier. So all that said, that's where the Buy Me a Coffee funds go, is in us endeavoring to keep learning and producing a better and better series of videos for you. Okay, I'm going to take one sip, and then I'm going to tell you an extra special thing. I'm sorry, Dave's asking something? Yeah, maybe let's take a minute to say hello to people. And then I'm going to tell you the kind of little bonus bit that we're getting in today's episode. So who's chiming in? Mickey from the North Georgia Mountains. Mickey comes often, so glad you're here today. Paula from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Chilly but sunny. Linda from the UK. Great. Nice to see you, Linda. Sue from Bancroft. Lots of you are regulars. I'm so glad you're here. Judy from Georgia also. And Lisa, Western Wisconsin. Joanne from Saskatchewan. I'm Canadian too, eh? So it's nice to see you here. Okay, So we do have a little twofer, and that'll give a few more people a chance to tune in if they'd like. What I've got loaded on my frame right now is actually a custom quilt for a client. And as you can see, it's not finished. The background quilting is not done yet. And I just couldn't finish it in time for today's episode. So I thought I could take it off and have my new one all loaded for you. And then I thought I could show you how I do that. So this is a little bit specific to my machine, but a lot of machine brands have a similar process. So I'm sewing on a Gamel, and it has what are called zippered leaders. And you're going to see how very handy those are in this process of changing over quilts. This is not the first time I've had to do this, and I guarantee you it won't be the last, that I need to insert one quilt into the queue. Oh, a little more space. 1 second. So basically, my canvas leaders that my quilt is attached to, top and bottom, have a zippered component. And it's just an edge of about, a generous 4 inches, almost 5, that is actually able to be zipped off. And my whole red snapper system is within those leaders. But the beauty of them is that literally with the zip of a zipper, I can unload this quilt. So there it is at the bottom. And unroll it just a little more. I want my leader to stay here handy for when I get ready to put the next component on. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing for the top end. Just going to roll all the way back to where that leader is exposed, that zipper. Move Lucy the long arm as far as I can. I'm trying not to walk all the way around, but I may have to. It is a big machine after all. And once again, with the zip of my zipper, I can take the other end of my quilt off. And the beauty of this now is that my quilt stays attached at the top. Of course, it's basted in place, but I don't have to take the backing off of my attachment. It's going to stay attached and stretched out to the leaders beautifully, and I'm just going to fold this and set it off to the side. And when I'm ready to restart this quilt this afternoon or evening, I can literally zip it back on. Now, while I carry the big mass away, I'll let you know a small caveat. You do get a little bit of distortion in that zipping on process, because what's quilted wants to pull together. So in my experience, it's kind of a two-person job, but it's not difficult and it's not time consuming, and it's just that easy to remove the custom quilt. And then what I've got is another set of these zippered leaders. Now the other bonus today is that because I'm using leaders that now don't have the red snapper rod and casing in them, I will be attaching my little backing with pins today. So if you've been wondering how I do that, make sure I get this on the right way. Yep. If you've been wondering how to do that, if you don't have the red snapper system or don't care for it, I will do it with pins today. I'm having a terrible time with the zipper. Have I got the wrong one? This always happens when you're in a hurry, right? Yep, there we go. So these leaders, for a lot of machine brands, you can buy them ready-made. They came with my machine. But I know folks who have also made them. This canvas can be purchased, and these long zippers come in 10 and 12 and 14-foot increments, or in fact, they come on a roll, and you can just cut them to length and put stoppers on them. So it's possible to make them as well. But this is kind of an invaluable thing if you ever find yourself having to swap out quilts. Far easier than if you unpin it. I don't know if it's even possible to get it back on, flat and square the same way that it was. So I don't know how that sounded with me moving around and huffing and puffing, but anyway, we've got it done. Okay, so let's get today's quilt loaded. So I'm going to show you essentially the same system for loading that I usually use, which means I don't have to use centering pins, but I will pin it because my red snappers are not being used at all today. So we just have a very little backing because it's a very little quilt. And I'm just bringing it over and I'm going to pin it to the front edge of my leader. I'll just get it where I can easily access it here with pins. Grab a small handful of pins. And it doesn't really matter where I start or where I stop. Is this a good place camera-wise, Dave? There we go. We'll try and make it so you can see it easily. Okay, a few pins. I'm pinning on a selvage edge so that it's a little more sturdy and not stretchy. That's my preference. And I'm just going to overlap it, well, about 3/4 of an inch, but against something like a hemline on my leader that helps me keep it straight. It doesn't really matter how much or how little. You don't want to do it too tiny or you'll have a hard time grasping it in the pin, but other than that, it doesn't really matter. And I'm just going along, putting my pins in, and they're basically nose to tail, if that makes sense. So I'm pulling up a stitch about 1 inch long with my pin, and then there's about 1 inch of gap before the next pin. So about every inch, I'm going up, down, and anchoring that in place. Usually, I'm dealing with a small piece of fabric, but usually I kind of wad it up in my hand like this, and I just release a little bit with every pin. So again, my pins are pretty much going in there, nose to tail, nose to tail. And when I'm not on camera, I'm usually a very bad girl and have a handful of pins in my mouth, which I know is not a good idea. A better idea would be to have something on your wrist, or if you have magnetic bowls, which I do, and magnetic rails, you can bring them along, kind of like this. And that can be helpful. So we're just pinning it. If I did not have a selvage here, I would be taking care to not be stretching my fabric at all, and I might even put a pin beginning and end and middle. It's a little harder to hang on to, but you want to be sure that you're not overly stretching this edge. Woo, don't want my pins to spill. Come back here. So there's edge number 1. And from there we're going to follow the same process I usually do, which is just to toss my backing over the far rail, and then I'm going to just start rolling it up. And the reason I have not had to center, it's kind of difficult with such a small piece. My leaders keep wanting to pull back in. I am going to rely on the straight grain of my fabric to roll it on here evenly. So I want to be sure that I don't have it off to one side or the other. If I'm seeing any of these diagonal creases forming, I know it is skewed. So that's important that you adjust your backing until you're not seeing those creases in either direction, and then you know it's running straight. And also, if you have a longer backing, make sure it's going straight all the way down and doesn't get twisted over there, so that when you roll on this side, it's rolling on straight. And you can perhaps see in the camera, this edge of my fabric is not straight at all. And I don't have to worry about that being squared up in advance because of this pulling it straight onto the roller. So it's a real time saver. Made a little bit difficult today because I've just got such a tiny piece of backing. It doesn't want to sort of grip as a larger piece would grip and pull more smoothly. So I'm just making sure it's smooth all the way. Now again, I know I keep blaming things on this being small, but it's a fact. If I had a longer backing, I would do this pinning laying down on the table. I would have left this whole thing longer, but I simply don't have enough length. So I went ahead and rolled it up so that I can now see this edge. And I want, again, to be careful not to move or distort this because it's pulled on nice and straight now. So I'm going to go ahead and put a few pins in to anchor it. And I'm pinning about 1/4 inch from the edge of my leader. Let's just put a few pins in there, beginning and end and middle, so that it can't shift. And now if this end was not perfectly straight, this too, I would not have to square up in advance. That is just totally taken care of by pulling it straight with the grain of the fabric onto the rollers. And so any excess that there is, I can let just hang off the end. Now it is important at this end, it's going to fold back on itself when I roll it. So it's kind of important that my pins be in a pretty straight line. I don't want some at 1/4 inch and some at 1/2 inch, or it's going to skew my backing as well. So I'm really aiming to get my pins 1/4 inch from the edge of that leader, which I can feel nicely underneath. And there are a number of ways in which you can flip your leader over your rails and lay it on the table, different things like that. Different quilters find what works for them. So I encourage you to watch other YouTube videos about loading besides mine and see if there might be a way that works easy for you. You know, you might be left-handed, and so that might work a little differently. There might be a better way for you. But for me, this way of pinning works pretty slick. So once those pins are all in place, we're all set to just finish rolling this on and get going. And can you see now where my fabric actually folded back on itself? So the pins are acting like a little seam. So that's where it was important to have the pins straight. Otherwise it would be pulling in uneven tension. So there's our backing. I'll show you our little quilt before we get started, just because it's so fun. Here is the whole thing. So this is from a quilt I made a couple years back, and it had this bonus block. And the pattern writer suggested just using it for a pillow. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. And here is today's fun project. I've got a couple of pieces of batting, which were left over from other things, which, you know, in and of themselves are not very useful. But I want to show you my very favorite way of splicing batting. It's pretty quick. It does not require any special tools or adhesives. And I think you'll like it. So basically, lay one piece on, and I should add here too. Can we put on the regular camera, Dave? Because it'll be easier. I'll be talking for a minute. It is not important to have your batting squared up. You do not have to have perfectly straight lines. But what you don't want to have is a really stretched out area or thinned out. Like occasionally at the end of a roll, it will be just very thin and it won't have much loft, almost like it's been torn. You don't really want that. You want a pretty good solid edge, if that makes sense. But it does not have to be straight. And at that point, we're going to lay it overlapping the piece we already have down. Now, I'm going to overlap by about 3 inches today. You can get away with about 2, but for your first try, give yourself a little more leeway. So I've got them overlapping by about 3 inches. And now I'm going to grab my scissors, which I set down just before we began. Just ordinary sewing shears. And I'm going to begin to cut through both layers. I don't think we need a closer camera, Dave. It'll be just fine.
Can't see the scissors on this one.
The one that we were on. Sorry, folks. Trying to get our cameras organized here. Yeah, I think that'll be the best one. So I'm going to cut scallops through both layers of the batting. Each scallop is about 1.5 inches wide and probably 6 or 7 long. They do not need to be precise. That's the beauty of this. And I will tell you why we're cutting scallops in just a second. Scallop, scallop, scallop. And now I want to take out the narrow pieces that I cut off. So one is going to be on top, one is going to be underneath. Pull those out. And now my scallops fit against each other because I cut them at the same moment. Here's the reason my rationale for cutting the scallops. If I were to cut a straight line, not quite in the camera, if I were to cut a straight line, let's do the other one, hon. I'm sorry, guys. I keep bouncing back and forth. A straight line, in my mind, will be apt to produce a fold. So when that quilt is folded in the cupboard, if it happens to be folded on that line, guess what's going to happen? The batting is going to pull a little bit apart, and it's going to be noticeable because it's straight. Even if you use some type of adhesive, there's lots of iron-on adhesives, and that's what I see most commonly used to pull two pieces of batting together. That adhesive has a different feel than the batting. So again, if the fold of your quilt happens to be there and that forms a crease, I feel like that's always going to be either visible or it's going to be feelable inside your quilt. So I prefer this way, which has no glue or adhesives at all in it. But this curved line means that if you hold it up to the light, you're not going to see the batting splice. If it gets folded there, you're not going to feel or see that batting splice or create a crease there. But you see why it doesn't really matter that they're exact at all. The point is just that you have curving lines. So a couple more things here too. This new piece of batting that I added at the bottom, make sure that there's no tension on it this way. Make sure there's plenty of it pushed up into that splice, so it's just almost but not quite overlapping, because again, as the quilt gets used and worn, you don't want those pulling apart. Even between your little areas of stitching, you don't want little gaps of blank to be showing, right? So make sure there's plenty of batting up there against that scallop. And if you're not 100% confident in that, you can come back with the needle and thread and put, you know, a 1 inch or so slip stitch along there, and I have done that in the past. I don't think it's necessary. My way of dealing with that has been, when I splice a batting like this, I always make sure that I have closer quilting. So I would say probably 1.5 inch gaps at most between the quilting. So I would not pick a big 3-inch loose design and splice batting, because I would be afraid that some of that might pull away over time, over washings in the future. Does that all make sense? So that's kind of my thinking. That's why I do the curved line, so that you will never get an obvious crease or fold. And that's why I put excess in there, so that there's plenty bumping up against each other. And thirdly, that's why I choose a slightly more dense quilting design. So 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 1.5 inch even will be totally fine. I have never had a quilt show these types of splices. I just am thrilled with this method. And like I said, super easy. It's just with the cut of a scissors. So that said, we're ready to load our big quilt. Look at that. Sure, let's take a few comments. And I'll get me a sip of coffee. The block pattern, by the way, is from the quilt Miss America by April Rosenthal. A little bit this way. Okay, we have some comments?
Our last one said hello is Michelle.
Michelle chiming in from Illinois. Good morning. Lisa, I love the magnetic bowl idea. Yes, those magnetic bowls, by the way, local hardware store. I mean, quilting shops sell them too, but they're 1/10 of the price at the hardware store. Not as pretty, but useful. Paula, sometimes the bowls from Harbor Freight are even free with the purchase. You're right. You're right. So keep an eye out for that. I just keep one at either end of my machine. Lisa, I got magnetic bars for my long arm from Harbor Freight. I also get my 45mm blades for my rotary cutter from them. Ah, I have not done that. And Laura, watch the rotary cutter blades. Not all are made for the fine quality of fabric and are made for other uses. Ask me how I know that. Good point, Lauren. Yeah, so experiment by all means, but be aware that you might be sacrificing quality. Lauren, love the scallop tip. We'll definitely use it. It works beautifully. I've done it on many of my own quilts. I typically don't do it on client quilts simply because they're paying me by the inch, you know, the linear inch for the batting. However, I will often have offcuts from quilts that I've done in the past that I cobble together for my own, and it works beautifully. Mickey, great tip. Excellent. Yeah, it works really well. One more slurp of coffee. So while I get going on the basting of this, a quick reminder that a new podcast episode went live on Wednesday. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to my podcast, I encourage you to do that. It can be found at podcast.stitchedbysusan.com. And this particular week, it is with Lauren Wright of Molly and Mama. She is an Australian, so if you enjoy listening to an Australian accent, it's really pleasant listening. And she's a beautiful designer of pretty things, not just quilts, but small projects, embroidery projects, embellishments, those sorts of things. I just have to get Lucy up to speed here. All right. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about the basting process today. That can be seen in lots of the other episodes. I really wanted today to focus on the batting splice, because I think that's a thing you could really use often in your day-to-day quilting. I am using my channel locks for all 4 sides of this today because I really want my cushion to be square, nice and square. So I know that it'll have 90-degree corners. I know that it will have perfectly parallel sides. That's the beauty of the channel locks. And if you don't have them, you might want to maybe use a yardstick or a long tape measure to measure it out and be sure that it's square, and put some anchoring pins in before you get going. I'm also going to go ahead and baste the whole thing. It doesn't quite, where's my hand? You can see it there. It doesn't quite fit in the throat of my machine, although it might if I roll it right to the top. This is when I'm very happy to have a 26-inch throat on my quilting machine. I can do pretty large things in one fell swoop. I think I might be able to do it. Now again here, if you're not confident with the squareness of your piece, you might want to measure, do some pinning, because I'm quilting across now to a side that's already been stitched down. Like on my left side, it's already been stitched, so I don't want to be pushing any fabric out that way. I'm able to see the whole thing probably better than you can, and so I'm just kind of eyeballing that. I do have my channel lock on, and it has lined up quite nicely with what I had stitched before. So I'll just go back up and meet my starting line, and there we are. Now let's just take a quick check and see if we can quilt the entire thing without rolling it. So there's the top. I need a little more clearance there. Here's the bottom. Yep, I sure can. Watch this, folks. If I back it up about an inch, of course they won't be able to see the top, will they, Dave? Okay, never mind me. You know how my mind works. I'm always looking for the tiny, tiny little efficiencies, right? But I don't have to. There's just nothing preventing me from rolling this one time. I'm just going to put my little anchors in place on the sides to make sure everything is snug. Sometimes when I go back and watch these videos on camera, it seems like my quilt is drum tight, so I'm going to just show you how I kind of gauge the tension. And I'm having a hard time putting this one anchor on because of this uneven edge on my cloth, but I think I got it. All right. Here's a simple way to kind of judge your tension. I put the fingers of one hand other side. Let's do it the other way around because it doesn't matter whether it's right or left. So I put one hand under the quilt and I put my fingers straight up into it, right up into the quilt, and I should be able to grab those fingertips. This should not be so taut that I can't. I know it looks taut to you on screen, but in fact there's a fair bit of give. And probably the most compelling reason for that is if you have it stretched drum tight in every direction and then you start stitching at high speed, it can really mess with your tension. You'll get thread breaks and thread shredding. So that's the first thing I look for when I'm having those problems is how tight is the tension of my fabric and loosen it up. Some do it even looser than I do. I've seen quilters where there's actually a visible sag to their quilt top, and perhaps they've learned that their machine prefers that. Lucy seems to do okay with this. I am going to quilt today a simple hibiscus kind of floral design on this. I just want to create a bit of all over texture, and I'm going to do it in a smaller scale than I typically do on quilts. I'm going to see if I can lower this just a little so it doesn't vibrate quite as badly. That should help. And I think I'll put it on constant speed today. This is something that I don't do all that often on these shows because it can be difficult to talk and quilt at the same time. In a sec, I'm going to change the speed. But you'll see as I'm quilting, it's very smooth to have that constant speed on. And I quite like that when I'm doing edge-to-edge work. I know it's difficult to see on this print, but there will be some areas you'll be able to see better what I'm quilting. So the quilting is not going to take very many minutes today. If you're not familiar with constant or unregulated speed, it basically just is a setting on your machine for usually a percentage of the total speed that the machine can go. But you just specify the speed at which that needle will go up and down. And when you push start, the needle just starts stitching, and then it's up to you to make movements that determine the stitch length. How fast you move determines that stitch length. One of the things this does for freehand quilters is it forces you to pay attention to smooth movements, because you can't zip ahead around corners really fast or you'll get really long leaping stitches. And also you can't pause for a long period of time or you'll get very, very, very tiny stitches. So it's a good exercise in helping you to practice stitching smoothly and rhythmically. All these fabrics, by the way, are April Rosenthal as well. I could not tell you off the top of my head what line of her fabrics it is, but it is from some years back. Probably 5 or so. Perhaps Meadow Bloom? That doesn't sound quite right. Anyway, certainly April Rosenthal. Very cheery, springy colors. This is a design that I call Hibiscus, and I use it quite a lot on floral quilts, but usually about double this scale. So that to me is one of the beauties of freehand quilting, is that I have the freedom. There's no reprogramming that I need to do or anything like that. I have the freedom to easily change up the scale of a design based on what I think looks good on my current project. We're going to pause right there and forward just a little bit. We're about 3/4 finished our quilt already, folks. If only they were all this speedy. And my backing on this, by the way, is just a very lightweight white fabric. It's probably a muslin, and it's too light, in my opinion, to use for a quilt. I think it probably is left over from the days that I made little girls' dresses and I used it for little collars. Anyway, it's perfect for this particular application because it will never show. It's going to be inside the pillow. What I'm quilting now will be the front of the pillow, and I'll make a whole separate backing for it, kind of envelope style. So it's just basically the interlining of the quilted pillow top. One of the reasons I chose to scale this design way smaller, aside from I think that dainty suits this project, but also because it's really difficult to fit a large design into small corners. So if I had 6-inch flowers, I'd only get 2.5 across the top of the pillow, and then, I'd have to be doing half flowers or partial petals all of the time. Where this way, I just think the scale of it suits the scale of the project, so I get many more entire flowers. And it's easier to work my way around this small area with a smaller motif. Okay, it's unscripted. Will you mute me a second, Dave? Sorry about that. There was a cough coming on, and I knew if I coughed into the microphone, I'd deafen all of you. So, sorry about that. Back at it. I often get asked how I choose the speed for my quilting, and I arrived at this particular speed with a good deal of experimentation. I say start slow, but if you're having a hard time making it smooth, try faster and try faster and faster and faster until you almost feel like you're being pushed or hurried, and then back it off a little bit. So you don't want to feel that hurried feeling and yet your quilting will be smoother if you go a little faster as opposed to really slow. I promise you, it's easier to get even stitch length and to quilt smoothly at a little bit higher speed. So go as fast as you can while still feeling in control. And that might differ for different designs as well. Like if I was doing tiny pebbles or something really small, I would back off that speed too, because I'm just not covering the same area with each little bit that I'm quilting. So the bigger and more sweeping your movements, probably the faster you can have that speed. I like the look of 12 stitches per inch, 12 or 13. So that's what I'm aiming for. It's terribly hard to see on these little green polka dots. And that's it. We have completed a quilt in not very many minutes. I'll move Lucy in just a moment and then you can have a better view. Other direction. Yep. There we go. I'll back it up just a little so you can see the whole thing. And I know on this floral print it's difficult to see the texture. So I will try and post some photographs over the next day or two if I ever get some good light in the studio, if the snow stops. Anyway, there it is. That is my pillow top. And yeah, next time you're over for coffee, it'll probably be on my couch as a whole pillow. But right across here is where my binding splice is. You can see it right here. And if I run my hands over that, there is absolutely no difference in that texture. I mean, even if I press with my fingertips. And that's what you want. You definitely don't want to feel any empty space in there between, but you also don't want to feel a ridge of it overlapping. So there's that fine balance in there. But it's a beautiful technique, works super well. I encourage you to try it and let me know how it works out for you. Okay, you want to say goodbye, Dave? Want to put me on camera? Do I get to be on camera? Let's take some questions if there are some. Absolutely. I'll move Lucy even further. She's so big. Let me grab my cup of coffee, okay? All right, Paula, when your live and unscripted project deals with printed fabrics, maybe you could start with the demo of the design on the side of the quilt with a solid fabric. I suppose that's possible, Paula, but kind of the point of my live and unscripted is not to teach the quilting design, but to show you kind of the big picture view of what processing a quilt looks like from start to finish. So at this point, that's kind of my goal with these episodes. Okay, go ahead. Judy, I've been listening to your podcast while working on my long arm. Oh, it's a match made in heaven. Wonderful. David, constant speed puts me to sleep. You know, it kind of does. I find when I'm the one quilting, I prefer the sound of the constant speed as opposed to the rising and falling of having the stitch regulator on. I find that gets tiring over time. Lauren, I could watch you quilt all day. Well, you know, I was thinking, and I don't know if I should insert this in the YouTube episode or not, but the custom quilt that I had loaded has a fairly dense fill, and that's what I've got left to do on it. So we may turn the cameras on this afternoon again because they're all in place anyway, right? And it won't be instructional, but I'll just be quilting. So should I put that in the Facebook group though, hon? I know for you poor folks that are watching this YouTube episode down the road. Okay. Here's the tentative plan. My Facebook page, which is called Stitched by Susan, check in there in about, an hour's time. And I'll try and do some quilting of that where you can just kind of watch that little fill being quilted out, since we've got the cameras all set up anyway. So in my Facebook page, Stitched by Susan, there'll be a live going on. Sue, I might have missed it, but do you now just add another piece of fabric to make the pillow cover? Yes. So this, I'm going to trim it up and treat it as though it's the top piece of fabric for my pillow, and I will make a separate backing and then make the pocket, or the envelope that is the pillow. I've just created my top layer of fabric, so super simple. All right, that's it for questions. Thank you, ladies, for joining me, and gentlemen, if there are any out there. I hope this has been helpful to you, and do please tag me if you use this technique and find it really helpful. I'd love to know how it works out for you. So I'm across all the social media as Stitched by Susan. I'd love to know how it works for you. Thanks for joining in. Like and subscribe if you have a moment, and we'll see you next time.